This is Gemara in Kesubos Daf Sadi Zayin. This is the daf for the second day of Yontif. In Mirta Hashem, we're going to begin these dafim up before Sukkot, as many have requested, so people could properly and adequately prepare for Yontif. Today's shir again has been generously sponsored as an incredible schos aliyas neshama for Nachum ben Mordechai. His yahrzeit was yesterday in Mirta Hashem. Nachum ben Mordechai shviyaylet and higher in place in Gan Eden Shalmayla, and as well be a tremendous milat yashar for his entire extended family. So says the Gemara on the top line of Sadi Zayin and Aleph, Keitzad Moicheres. We have this almana who's selling the properties of her ex-husband, of her deceased husband, and the question is, how does she sell it? And as we're going to see for the Gemara's answer, we're trying to figure out, there's no way that we're going to let a woman just go and sell off the whole estate and say, oh, this is for my support for the next 10 years. Why not? Because maybe within the next 10 years she's going to get remarried and then she doesn't get support anymore. So the Gemara now is discussing what is the feasible and the normal time period that a woman could sell the property to feed herself. Amar Rav Daniel bar Rav Ketina Amar Avuna Macheres Achas L'Shtei Masa Chaydesh. Opinion number one, Rav Daniel bar Rav Ketina says she sells the property once in 12 months, one time a year she could sell, and then the person who buys the property every 30 days, once a month, pays out for that field, and that is what she gets supported for the mizainis. Says the Gemara, but Rav Yehuda argues and he says, not for 12 months. Only for 6 months, and the Gemara, as Gemaras often do, teach us, we have a brayso like Ravuna that says, so you have machlokes Ravuna and Rav Yehuda, each one has a brayso bolstering their opinion, whether a woman sells for 6 months or 12 months, and takes support for 30 days at a time for her mizainis. Says the Gemara, Amar Ameimar, we paskin like Rav Yehuda that she sells for 6 months at a time. Amar Ravajda Ameimar, the Ravuna Mai. What do you do with Ravuna? Ravuna also seemingly had a raya. Amar Le Lo Shmili Klemer Lo Sfir Li. I didn't hear it, which says the Gemara is a way of saying I don't agree, and rather you sell it for 6 months intervals. About 15 lines down, the first one line is Li. They asked of Rav Shishis, if a almana sells for mizainis, sells part of their estate like we're discussing now for 6 months or 12 months for her support, let's say she then wants afterwards to go and collect a ksuba. She also gets her ksuba. Of course, an almana gets both. She gets support and she gets her ksuba. So she wants to afterwards go and collect the land itself. The land is no longer producing that it could give her a monthly support, but now she wants to go and take back this land that she sold for her own ksuba. So explains the Gemara, this shaila is really a shaila about something that Rav Yosef taught us. The Amar Rav Yosef, that Rav Yosef has taught us, this is going to be something that we'll learn in a few days. Armalta de Zavin Achraesa Yasmi. An almana who sells something, who sells part of an estate, part of the late, her ex-husband's property. The question is, who guarantees that sale? So Armalta de Zavin Achraesa Yasmi. Says Rav Yosef, the Yisayimim are the ones that have to back up the sale. And if someone comes to collect his field, the Yisayimim are the ones that are going to have to pay it up. Ubeidina dizavin achrayis yasmi. And similarly, a bezdin that sells a field of a deceased man, the Yisayimim are the ones that have to pick up the tab, that they have the achrayis, they have the security in case someone comes to collect that field. So says the Gemara, Mai. So what is the halacha? Can this almana come and collect the ksuba from the very field that she herself sold for her monthly support? And the Gemara now explains, do we say do we say that since the Yisayimim are the ones that guarantee the field, therefore she's allowed to collect the land as payment for a ksuba. Or perhaps we say the purchaser of this field can tell her, I understand that you did not accept the achrayis of the whole world, but rather the yisaimim are the ones that guarantee the sale. But achrayis did avshach mila kabulis kebalta, similar to what we saw a few days ago. But do you not accept your own achrayis? You're coming to collect the very field that you sold us. Perhaps the yisaimim could say that is ludicrous, and we do not agree to that. So answers Rav Sheshes Amar Leitani to Avarayim from the Mishnah. Says the Brisa, she's allowed to sell the property ad kedei ksubasa, until the value of a ksuba, then visamach lo, and then the remaining, the karka itself, is a smach, is that which eventually she could collect from. She'atikva ksubasa min ashar, that she collects the ksuba from the remainder. So the Brisa says she collects the monthly support from that which the field produces, and then the field itself is the smach, is the guarantee. So concludes the Gemara, Shma Amina, Shiriyin lo sheyara loi. So what do you see from this Brisa? If visamach la, if there's something left over, then she collects it as a ksuba. But if there is nothing left over of the land, what would be a case where there's nothing left over if she collected everything for her ksuba? Then she cannot collect it for her ksuba. So says the Gemara Varaya that she cannot go and collect this very land for her ksuba. Ask the Gemara, what do you mean? Maybe the Bryce is just telling you good advice that people shouldn't call her someone who backs up, an Indian giver like we call it, that you gave this field and now you're collecting it. So maybe the Bryce itself cannot bring a raya. Im Kain says the Gemara, listening going to in Ashar, my samachla. So the Brisa should have said she collects on the remainder. Why did the Brisa say samachla, that the field is a smach? From the fact, the wordage of the Brisa itself that teaches us that it's only if there is a shayara, only if there is something left over. But lo shayara loi, but there is nothing left over, then she does not get the ability to collect ksuba from this piece of land. Continues the Gemara with a new shayla. Says the Gemara, a fundamental shayla. Nothing to do with any yisaimim, any almana. We have a person, he sells a piece of his land. Why does he sell a piece of his land? Because he needs the cash. And then what happens is he doesn't end up needing the money. Is he allowed to back out or not? Hadri zvini, oi loy hadri zvini. And before we even continue, we'll point it out in a moment. Let's continue. Says the Gemara, I'll bring you a raya. Tashema. The who gaffer there's up an hour. The Rav there's a man that's sold land. Rav Papa there's a turi. Why? Because he needed the money to buy oxen. And then he didn't need the oxen. He didn't need the money for the oxen. Vajrin ale Rav Papa and Rav Papa gave back the land. So we see that if someone sells something because he needs the money for something, if he doesn't end up needing that money, then the sale does indeed go back. Says the Gemara, no, Rayo, Rapapa of them is sure as I didn't know the Avad. Maybe Rapapa just returned it, he was being a tzaddik, but not necessarily as a Raya, that the din is that the field could go back. Tashma Ubet Surda David bin Arda says the Gemara, bring you a different Raya. There was a famine, a food shortage in Arda. Zavinu Kuliyamul Apadine. And what happened? People had no food. So everyone sold their mansions to buy wheat. And then one day, wheat arrives. And therefore, the price of wheat falls, and everyone doesn't need the money for the sale of their mansions. Paskins Rav Nachman, all the sales go back. The sale of the mansion is meaningless, and it goes back. So says the Gemara, no, says the Gemara, no, the reason over there the mansion sale goes back is not because anytime one wants to renege, because he doesn't need the money right now, he's allowed to. But rather the reason is because the entire sale was bitayas. Why? Because we found out that the ship bringing the wheat was already on its way. So the whole premise of the sale was because they thought they didn't have food, but they had food. That's why it goes back. But in a regular case, maybe not. Ask the Gemara, now, this Iyachi, we're going to learn like Rashi, that it's not a kasha. Taisus calls issue onto this Rashi, and Taisus learns that this is a kasha. But let's learn it like Rashi, that this is going to be a raya to Rav Nachman. Iyachi, hainu damar le Rami bar Shmuel. Rav Nachman imkenim says machshin laselavai. If what you're saying is true, that they go back in the sale of the mansions, it could cause the buyers in the future to have a michshol, because they're not going to want to sell their lands because they're afraid it's going to go back. I don't understand. Is every day a food shortage? Of course not. So this will not cause into question any other future issues, because it's specifically in this case of a food shortage. Amar lei, Rami bar Shmuel says Rav Nachman, no, indeed, it is a common scenario, and therefore we should indeed be worried about it. The sale does indeed go back. Now, the one point that we want to point out is that Taisus makes mention over here that we have to be talking about a case where he said at the time of the sale that this is the why he was selling the land. Because if he was quiet and this was just his intention, we hold Dvarim Shabalev, Einoi Dvarim, words in your heart are meaningless with regard to halachic acquisitions, and therefore the case has to be that he articulated that this is why he's selling the field. We continue on the bottom of Sadi Zayin Amar Aleph, says the Mishnah, based on what we've learned in the past, that the estate is there to pay for the ksuba of the almana and to pay for the mezainos of the almana. Continues the Mishnah and says, almana bein min eiros and bein min asurim meicheresh lebebezdin. If she wants to collect her support, if she wants to collect her ksuba, says the Tanakama, she sells the estate of her late husband, shalai bebezdin. She does not have to come to Bezdin to make that sale. Rav Shimon argues, minan isuin mecheresh lebebezdin. If she didn't sue and if she had chuppah, if she consummated the marriage, then it's true. Then she could sell outside of Bezdin. But if she only did erisin, then she has to go to Bezdin. Why? Because the halacha is she does not get support in that case. She only has a right to her ksuba after erisin. And therefore the halacha is she has to go to Bezdin. So now, says the Gemara, let's try to understand this thing in the Mishnah, starting with the Tanakama. The Tanakama said, in any scenario that she's selling the land of her late husband, but whether they did erisin, whether they didn't sue, and she does not have to go to Bezdin. So says the Gemara in the last line of Sadizayna, I understand that if she's selling after Nisuin, she's selling it for Mizainais. So now it makes a lot of sense that we don't require her to go to Bezdin. Why not? Because she needs food. And if we're going to require her to go to Bezdin to sell it, she's going to starve. And therefore, since she's selling it for Mezaina, says the Gemara, I understand that she doesn't have to go to Bezdin. But I ask the Gemara as we turn over to Sadi Zayinim and Bezel and Erisin. But if she's selling the land after Erisin, my taima, why does she not have to go to Bezdin if she's selling it just for the Ksuba? Amarula says, and Rashi points like every case of one who is being mitzi shtar chayv, you have to do it in Bezdin. Amarula, you know why? Misham china. We want their husbands to find favor in their eyes. We do not want to make it difficult for a woman to sell and collect her ksuba. So, and the woman will be desirous to get married, and therefore we make it easier for her to sell the ksuba. Rav Yochanan Amar, a second reason. Says Rav Yochanan, you know why? Even if there was just erisin, a person does not want his wife to be embarrassed by going to Bezdin. He was nifter, his wife wants to collect her ksuba. The husband is happy that she collects it by selling the land, not in Bezdin. My beinayu, what's the practical difference between the two answers of Ula and Rav Yochanan? Beinayu grusha. If they were divorced, meaning not a case of almana, she's collecting her ksuba after a divorce. If the whole impetus was that we want a woman to be desirous to get marriage, in the case of grusha, that applies as well. But according to Rav Yochanan, that the reason that she could sell non-bezdin is so that she doesn't get embarrassed. When it comes to a grusha, the husband doesn't care. And therefore, in such a scenario, according to Rav Yochanan, he would, yes, require her to sell the land inside of a Bezdin. Tanan, says the Gemara, 8 lines down, first one line is Lai. Let's bring a raya to Rav Yochanan. Says the Braisa, a grusha sells only in Bezdin. If, according to Manda Amar, that says that a husband doesn't want his wife to be embarrassed, grusha doesn't care, and therefore it makes a lot of sense that we're requiring her to go to Bezdin. The Braisa makes sense according to Rabbi Yochanan. So according to Ula, why does this Braisa say that she has to sell it in Bezdin? Explains the Gemara, Amani Rav Shimoni. No, this Braisa, it's true, sounds like Rabbi Yochanan, but that's only because the Braisa is going with the opinion of Rav Shimon, and Rav Shimon was the opinion in our Mishnah that says that an Arusa has to go to Bezdin. Rav Shimon was the opinion in the Mishnah, the Seifa of the Mishnah, that differentiated between Erusin and Nisun. Ask the Gemara 1 second. We're in the middle of explaining the Reish of the Tanakh. You're saying it's going with Rav Shimon. Here, Rav Shimon, if it's Rav Shimon, it doesn't read in the Mishnah. Because the Reisha, he already said in the beginning of the Mishnah that Min Erusin Loi Timkar Ella Bebezdin. So why would Rav Shimon be saying the same din 2 times? So explains the Gemara, explains the Gemara, I would have thought in the case of Almana after Erusin, then there's not such a high level of chayin desirable because it was only Erusin. But in a scenario when there's a gerusha from the suin, you would think that there's a high level of chayin required, and therefore that's the reason why we had to teach the din 2 times. Says the Gemara 1 second, Anami Tanina. But in truth, you already taught this din. About 20 lines down, the first word on the line is Nami Tanina. Where do we teach this din? Rav Shimon said in the Mishnah, the last line of the Mishnah, which I'm sure when we read that line, people were wondering that it sounded repetitive. Says the Gemara, the last line of the Mishnah, when the Mishnah says, Kol she'in lam mezainos, the Mishnah says, any woman who does not get mezainos sells it only in Bezdin. What case is that last line coming to include? Lav lasuye grusha. Is it not coming to teach us the case of a grusha from the suin and teaches us that she has to go to Bezdin? So Rav Shimon in the Mishnah already taught this din of grusha from the suin. Explains the Gemara, lie, Ula can make sense. Lasuye, the last line of the Mishnah is migureshes, veina migureshes, kidder Rav Zera. It's coming to include a case of a suffix gerushin, like Rav Zera, Damar Rav Zera, Kol Makish, Amar Migureshes, veina migureshes, Baal Chayiv Imzay Naisel. So the final line of the Mishnah could be teaching us, in this case, of a suffix gerushin, that in the Mishnah, Rav Shimon would be teaching us that she would not get support in such a scenario. So that is how Ula will be able to learn the Mishnah. Tashema continues the Gemara asking on Ula. Says the Bryce. Kishem, just like a almana could sell her husband's estate without a bezdin, so to the Yarshim could do the same. So explains the Gemara. According to Rabbi Yochanan, as we saw back in the second line, that the whole reason why a woman does not have to go to Bezdin is because the husband does not want his wife to be embarrassed in court. Just like a man doesn't want his wife to be embarrassed, he also doesn't want the Yarshim to be embarrassed. So it makes sense that the same din applies by the Yarshim. According to the Manda Amar that says that the whole reason of the Mishnah is due to Chayin. What Chayin? The whole part in Chayin was to make women desirous to get married. What would that have to do with the Yarshim? So says Ula, you know what the case is referring to? An unmarried daughter, an unmarried sister, and therefore there is a cause to increase their desire to get marriage, and therefore there would be a reason of chayin even in such a scenario. And we continue, and we're going to conclude with the Mishnah over here in the bottom of Sadi Zayin Amid Beis. Says the Mishnah, if a woman, an almana, sells the ksuba or part of it, mishkan ksubasa miksasa, or she gives her ksuba as a mashkan or part of it, nas ksubas la'achar miksasa, or she gives part of her ksuba away or part of it, loy timkar sashar ela bebezdin. The remainder of the ksuba she has to sell in bezdin. And Rashi over here points out right away that we're going to the opinion of Rav Shimon. The Rashi said that Rav Shimon just said, as we just discussed extensively, they're only allowed to sell inside Bezdin, and therefore, since she already collected part of it, she does not get any more mezainis. And that's the reason why the Mishnah is teaching us that she's going to sell it in Bezdin, as the Gemara is going to explain in a moment. She could sell as many times as she wants. Anytime she's selling for mezainis, she does not need a bezdin. But the Chachamim added on that what she should write at such a sale that I'm selling you for mezainis. This was the Mishnah we referenced in yesterday's daf. That was like the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda that seemingly showed us that she should articulate the reason why she's making the sale. But we said yesterday this is not necessarily a right to Rabbi Yehuda, as perhaps we just don't want her to be called someone who reneges on her deal. And a grusha cannot sell the land only if she is in Bezdin. Let's just see one line of the Gemara, as we saw already in Rashi, Masnisa Nami, Rav Shimoni. Who is the Tanakama? It's Rav Shimon. The Tani learned in a Brayso, Mach Kesubos, Mishkan Kesubos, Asas Kesubos, Abatiki La'acher, Ein La Mezayna Istivri Ameir. So Rameir is of the opinion, the Tanakam of this Brayso is of the opinion that once she does anything with the Ksuba, she loses Mezaynis. Rav Shimon Aimer Av Bishlamach of Lavishka Kesubasa Al Machsisa of the Mezaynaisa. Says Rav Shimon, excuse me, I said it wrong. Tanakama is of the opinion only if she sells the entire ksuba. She makes the entire ksuba mashkin or an apaitiki, something to collect from. Then she loses her mezainis. Rav Shimon is of the opinion that no, even if she only sells part of it, she already loses the mezainis. And that's the reason why, according to Rav Shimon, in the Mishnah, when she's only collecting part of the ksuba, she does not have any mezainis, like the Tanakam in the Mishnah taught us. We'll pick up, continuing the discussion, the Shita of Rav Shimon in the next daf, Amir Tzah Hashem.